Here we are on the CLI. Before we get into configuring the history buffer, I wanted to show you one of the ways that you can use this, and I think I mentioned this in these slides, is that you can start with an initial configuration that you paste on all your routers, and I'll do that here. I've got two routers, I've got R1 and R2. Both are basically in a completely out of the box configuration. Right now I'm going to go into R1 and do some of my basic configuration that I throw on every router. I'm going to pause the video because you don't want to watch me type, and then I'll come back and show you how we can utilize the show history command. Okay, so as you can see here, I've gone in and added a few lines of configuration here, and starting with like the host name, no IP domain lookup. This is something I do on almost all the routers, especially in a lab situation. So now I could pop over to R2 and duplicate my effort, or I could take and cut and paste all. Okay, when I say cut and paste, I meant cut and paste. Cut and paste all this, but then I had to remove this bit to get to it. But what's cool is we're using a version of the history command, do show history. Remember, when you're in configuration mode, you're going to want to use that do command. That's going to allow you to execute an exec level command from configuration mode. Hit enter, and this is pretty cool. So now I can cut and paste all of this, and actually when I do this, I don't use the host. I'll just type that in, but all this stuff down to the to the do show history, this is duplicate. I can just cut and paste this on R2. So if I get over here in configuration mode, I'll set my host R2, and then I can just paste this bit, and there you go. Now my configuration is the same on both routers. This is really nice for when you're just churning out router configuration. You could save this to Notepad or some type of text file and keep it there. This comes in really handy when you're doing CCIE labs and you have to configure a number of devices with the same configuration or a slight variation. This is a big time saver, so if you guys are looking at going for the CCIE, definitely keep this in mind. So I've gone on and configured the rest of the router setup here. What I want to show you now is the difference between the show history in exec mode versus configuration mode. So in R2, I have issued a number of exec level commands, and let's go ahead and issue show history. And here we go. We can see these commands. So you can see stuff like configuration terminal. It doesn't give you the whole command, it gives you exactly what you typed in there. So here I must have gone into enable mode, configuration terminal, did some configuration. You can see here that I did some configuration, came out of configuration mode, and then I wrote the configuration, but you don't see the actual configuration commands. And you can see ping, show IP route. If you type in something that is not a command, it will still show up in the history buffer. So it's even if you type in something that's not valid. So be careful of that. We'll touch on that basically a little bit when we go into the configuration mode in a second here, because that's where it can really sting you. So I like cookies obviously is not a Cisco iOS command, although it should be. Should give me fresh hot cookies. And then you can see it also shows our show history command. Alright, so let's see. We have default setting on R1. If we do show terminal, you see there's a ton of stuff that comes out of terminal, and all we're basically looking for is the right here. History is enabled. History size is 20. So with this platform, and I'm running a 3725 with 12.4.15 code, you can see that the default is actually 20, which contradicts the Cisco documentation. As always, Cisco documentation is the good word, so go with that rather than what you see here. So going forward, we're going to use show term. I'm not going to type out terminal, and then a pipe and include history. And actually, I'm just going to put in HIST. So you saw that we got a ton of output from show term. What this is doing is it's just parsing through that output and just looking for that particular line that we want. So here we got history is enabled and the history size is 20. Alright, so let's get into configuration mode, and we're on the console line here. Let's go under the console line and we're going to set a different history size. And you can see you have the options from 0 to 256. Let's set this to 69. Yes, I'm a child. Fuck you. Okay, so what I want to show you here now is if we up arrow, which is actually using our history buffer, since we're on the console line, it's now gone ahead and set the history size to 69, which is what we have set for the console line in the configuration. Now remember seeing that you can change the history size either from the configuration mode or from exec mode. So here we're going to attempt to change the history side from exec mode using the terminal history. And you can see here size is basically all you have an option for. And we'll set it to 100. So now you've set this from configuration mode and you've also set it from exec mode. So which mode do you think is going to take control of this? Is it going to be 69? Is going to be our history size as we configured in the configuration mode, or is it going to be 100 like we just did from the exec mode? I would have bet 69, but I know what the answer is. It's 100. So you can see that you can override on a per terminal line basis the history size setting that is in the running configuration, which seems, counterintuitive, but just keep that in mind. It's a lot of this stuff you're not going to have to deal with. Basically, all you're going to want to know is that this works and how to set the history size, and we just showed you how to do that from both configuration and from the exec mode. And I told you this is based on a per TTY line. So if you do a show users here, we're the only user. We're on line 0, which is a console line. Okay, so I could go on R2 and log in, but what I'll do is there's a loopback. I'll just telnet to the loopback. Password is packetlab. Enable is packetlab. Now when I do a show users, there should be 2 users. Okay, so got a user on console line 0, which is TTY line 0. We've got a user on VTY line 0, which is actually line 98. We set the history size to be 100 on our terminal session, which would be for TTY line 0, and we haven't touched the VTY line. So it should be 100 here, and it should be 20 here. So now if we do show term include history, we do see that it's 20. And if you want to verify that it's actually different on the other line, if you do a show line 0, which is a console line, include history, you can see that it's 100 here. So just know that you could set this on a per TTY line basis. Let's go ahead and disable the history buffer, and from the exec mode to do that you use the terminal no history. Well, before I do that, let me make sure to verify that history is enabled, and it is currently at the default size of 20. So now terminal no history, and I'm not going to type the whole thing, you get the gist of this. So now if I do a show history, I get nothing. I can't even up arrow to get back to show term include hist, and there you see it is disabled. So now this is on a per TTY line basis. Again, we're still telnetted in there, so if we did this show line 0, you can still see it's enabled there. So again, always remember this is a per TTY line basis, and to re-enable that we would just have to type in terminal history. And now since we have the up arrow, we can see that history has been re-enabled, and we're back to our default. To do the same thing from configuration mode, I'm going to actually do it under the VTY because I'm technically telnetted into this right now. To disable it's just no history. Go ahead, break out, and I can't up arrow, so I know I do a show term include history. It is disabled. To re-enable it, you don't have your history cache in configuration mode either, so just history. And now I should be able to up arrow, and it's even kept some of that history in that buffer, so when it's disabled it's still keeping history commands. We do a show history. Remember we disabled this a couple different ways, but we've got just a ton of history here. So it doesn't delete what's in that buffer, it basically just doesn't give you access to it, So I don't know, a little bit of trivia there for you. Amaze and entertain your friends at parties.